Over the industrial heartland of Germany, a brutal aerial ballet unfolded on March 24, 1945. A vast armada of B-17 flying fortresses, components of the U.S. 8th Air Force, pressed towards their target, the Daimler-Benz tank engine plant at Berlin-Marienfelde. The skies were a maelstrom of flak bursts and the lethal contrails of Luftwaffe interceptors. Deep within the bomber stream, a squadron of Messerschmitt Me-262 jet fighters, screaming at speeds that defied conventional piston engine pursuit, initiated a devastating head-on attack against the lead bomber element. The velocity differential was so extreme that standard escort tactics proved almost useless. Conventional fighters struggled to even engage these revolutionary aircraft. Yet, as the German jets broke through the initial screen, their cannons already spitting fire, a formation of P-51 Mustangs, distinctive with their crimson-painted tails, plunged into the fray. These were the legendary Red Tails of the 332nd Fighter Group, commanded by Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. Instead of the typical, often undisciplined, chase for individual kills that characterized many fighter units, the Red Tails executed a meticulously coordinated defense. Captain Charles L. Brantley, flying his P-51, observed a pair of Me-262s diving on a crippled B-17. Breaking formation, Brantley engaged the lead jet, forcing it into a sharp, evasive maneuver, while Lieutenant Samuel L. Washington targeted the wingman. This rapid, decisive intervention, prioritizing the bomber's survival over a kill, was a hallmark of the 332nd's discipline. Within moments, 3 Me-262s, the pride of the Luftwaffe's technological arsenal, were either damaged or destroyed by Red Tail pilots Lieutenant Roscoe C. Brown, Lieutenant Earl R. Lane, and Captain Brantley himself. The bomber formation, though shaken, continued its perilous journey, its vital mission salvaged by the unwavering commitment of its escort. This level of operational discipline and combat effectiveness, however, stood in stark contrast to the unit's very genesis. Far from being heralded as elite aviators, the black pilots of the Tuskegee Experiment were initially viewed with pervasive skepticism, even outright scorn, by much of the American military establishment. Segregationist policies and ingrained racial prejudice had deemed African Americans intellectually and psychologically unfit for complex tasks such as flying combat aircraft. The very existence of the Tuskegee Airmen, including the 332nd Fighter Group, was born more from political necessity and civil rights advocacy than from a belief in their inherent capabilities. They were, in essence, an experiment launched into a crucible of war with the implication of failure. It was against this backdrop of institutionalized doubt and active resistance that Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., a man forged in the fires of personal prejudice, would meticulously build a fighting force that would not only shatter aerial records, but fundamentally redefine the parameters of military leadership and racial equality. The crucible of prejudice that shaped Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. began not in the skies over Europe, but within the hollowed yet profoundly unwelcoming halls of the United States Military Academy at West Point. Born into a family with a distinguished military lineage, his father, Benjamin O. Davis Sr., would later become the U.S. Army's first African-American general. Young Davis inherited a legacy of service, yet a stark awareness of the racial barriers that permeated every facet of American life. His ambition, however, was unequivocal: to become an officer in the U.S. Army Air Corps. In 1932, Davis Jr. matriculated at West Point, one of the exceptionally rare African Americans to gain admission to the prestigious institution. His arrival was met not with camaraderie, but with a calculated, systemic campaign of isolation known as the silence treatment. For 4 grueling years, his fellow cadets, acting on unspoken directives and ingrained prejudices, refused to speak to him outside of official duties. He ate alone, walked alone, and endured the academic and physical rigors of the academy without a single social interaction from his peers. This was not merely social exclusion, it was a deliberate psychological operation designed to force his resignation, a tactic historically employed against other black cadets. Yet Davis Jr., possessing an iron will and an unshakable resolve, refused to break. He graduated in 1936, one of only 2 African Americans in his class, and one of only a handful in the Academy's history, a testament to his extraordinary resilience against institutionalized racism. This period at West Point was a microcosm of the profound systemic racism that infected the U.S. military and society at large. Jim Crow laws enforced strict segregation across the nation, and the armed forces were no exception. African American soldiers were largely relegated to menial support roles, such as quartermasters, cooks, or laborers. The prevailing, deeply flawed scientific and sociological theories of the era posited that Black individuals lacked the intellectual capacity, courage, or psychological stability required for leadership, complex technical roles, or combat aviation. Military policy, codified in regulations and often reinforced by the highest echelons of command, explicitly stated that the Negro is subservient to the white race and that they cannot be utilized in positions requiring leadership or initiative. This pervasive, officially sanctioned skepticism formed the formidable ideological and structural barrier that Benjamin O. Davis Jr. would confront throughout his career, particularly as he began his ascent through the ranks, seeking to command men who were routinely denied the very dignity of combat. His personal fight for recognition and respect would soon merge with a larger national struggle for civil rights, setting the stage for an unprecedented challenge to the military's racial orthodoxy. As the storm clouds of global conflict gathered over Europe and Asia, threatening the very foundations of global democracy, the United States found itself grappling with a profound internal contradiction. The nation prepared to commit its sons and resources to a war against totalitarian regimes that championed racial superiority and ethnic cleansing. Yet at home, its own society and military were rigidly structured by systemic racial segregation. The separate but equal doctrine, deeply ingrained in American life through Jim Crow laws, extended its insidious reach into every facet of the armed forces. Within the U.S. Army, Black soldiers were largely confined to service and support roles, relegated to menial tasks in segregated units, often denied combat positions, and systematically excluded from opportunities for promotion or specialized training. Prevailing prejudices, frequently codified in official studies by the War Department's general staff, asserted the inherent inferiority of Black soldiers, questioning their courage, intelligence, and capacity for leadership. This institutionalized discrimination created an untenable moral and strategic paradox. How could America credibly fight for freedom and democratic ideals abroad when it systematically denied those rights of opportunities to its own Black citizens, particularly those willing to serve and sacrifice? This glaring hypocrisy did not go unchallenged. A powerful and growing civil rights movement, spearheaded by organizations like the NAACP and influential Black publications, exerted relentless pressure on the Roosevelt administration and the military establishment. They demanded not just equality in general, but specifically the right for Black Americans to participate fully in all branches of military service, including the burgeoning and highly symbolic field of military aviation. The argument was direct. If Black men were expected to fight and die for their country, they must be afforded the same opportunities and respect as any other soldier, pilot, or sailor. This mounting political and social pressure ultimately forced the military's hand, setting the stage for what many in the War Department viewed as a reluctant and, frankly, doomed experiment. The concept of an all-Black flying unit was not born of a sudden enlightenment within the War Department. Quite the opposite. It was a grudging concession, a political necessity to quell growing domestic unrest and counter Axis propaganda that highlighted America's stark racial hypocrisy. Thus, in 1941, deep in Alabama, the Tuskegee Army Airfield was established. This was not merely a new training base. It was the crucible for what many high-ranking military officials openly dismissed as the Negro Experiment. Here, the 99th Fighter Squadron, the nation's first all-Black combat aviation unit, began its arduous formation. Its commander was a man uniquely positioned to bear the immense burden of this undertaking, Captain Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. A rare Black graduate of West Point, Davis Jr. had endured years of institutionalized racism within the academy, silent treatment from cadets, segregation in dining halls, yet had graduated with an impeccable record. Now, he was tasked not only with forging combat pilots out of raw recruits, but also with disproving generations of pseudoscientific racial theories promulgated by the very institution he served. The unspoken mandate was clear. Failure would validate existing prejudices and forever bar Black Americans from aerial combat roles. Success, however, was seen by many as an impossible, if not improbable outcome, given the prevailing belief in Black intellectual and physical inferiority. Every maneuver, every flight hour, every academic score was under intense scrutiny, not just for operational proficiency, but as a perceived referendum on an entire race. The pressure on Davis Jr. and his nascent squadron was extraordinary, a form of psychological warfare waged not by the enemy, but by elements within their own command structure. They were not merely training to fly and fight, they were fighting for the right to fly at all. The 99th Fighter Squadron's operational deployment to North Africa in April 1943 marked not an end to their trials, but a new, more insidious phase. Now, under the direct command of Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr., this pioneering unit faced a dual war, one against the Axis powers and another, equally relentless, against ingrained racial prejudice within the Allied ranks. Davis, a West Point graduate, brought to his command an unparalleled discipline and a strategic foresight born from years of navigating a segregated military. He understood that every sortie, every maneuver, every success or failure would be scrutinized not merely for its combat outcome, but as a referendum on the capabilities of an entire race. His leadership style was one of meticulous preparation and unwavering expectation. He instilled in his pilots a doctrine of absolute tactical proficiency, pushing them through rigorous training regimens that emphasized precision flying, advanced aerial combat maneuvers, and unerring gunnery skills, particularly in their P-40 Warhawks. This wasn't just about readiness, it was about equipping them to perform beyond question, to leave no room for doubt or disparagement. He demanded excellence not as an ideal, but as a strategic imperative for survival, both in the air and within the prejudiced military hierarchy. Despite their dedication and escalating combat experience, the 99th was subjected to constant skepticism and outright hostility from many white commanders. This pervasive bias often manifested as subtle sabotage or, more overtly, as dismissive assessments of their combat efficacy. The most prominent and damaging of these came from Colonel William M. Meare, commander of the 33rd Fighter Group, to which the 99th was initially attached. Meare, harboring deeply ingrained prejudices, systematically issued negative reports to his superiors. His assessments painted a picture of pilots lacking aggression, tactical acumen, and the essential killer instinct required for air-to-air engagements. He meticulously highlighted minor operational shortcomings, often exaggerating their significance, while conveniently overlooking or downplaying genuine successes. Meare's objective was clear: to prove that Black pilots were inherently unfit for combat and to advocate for the immediate disbandment of the Tuskegee program. He famously declared in one report that the 99th was not ready for combat and suggested they be relegated to less demanding roles. Such prejudicial assessments, though lacking objective validation, carried significant weight within the command structure, threatening the very existence of the Tuskegee Airmen. Davis Jr. found himself not only leading his squadron in fierce aerial battles, but also engaged in a constant bureaucratic struggle, forced to meticulously document every achievement and counter every unfounded accusation, fighting to protect his men's reputation and their place in the war effort. His command was a crucible, forging not just pilots, but a unit whose very existence challenged the racial orthodoxies of its time. The crucible of combat serves as the ultimate arbiter of a unit's worth. For the 99th Fighter Squadron, the testing ground arrived not as a gradual acclimatization, but as an immediate immersion into the unforgiving skies of the Mediterranean theater of operations. Deployed to North Africa in April 1943, their initial missions were predominantly ground attack and patrol, providing close air support and interdiction against Axis supply lines. These early engagements, while demonstrating basic operational capacity, were frequently overshadowed by the systemic skepticism of the larger command structure. Reports, often tinged with racial bias, questioned their aggression and combat effectiveness, echoing the very prejudices Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr. fought to dismantle. However, the true proving ground materialized in January 1944 with Operation Shingle, the Allied amphibious landings at Anzio, Italy. This audacious maneuver aimed to outflank the formidable German Gustav Line, but quickly devolved into a desperate, protracted stalemate. The Allied beachhead became a vulnerable salient, battered daily by concentrated German artillery and relentless Luftwaffe attacks. It was into this cauldron that the 99th Fighter Squadron, now integrated into the 12th Air Force, was thrust. Under the unwavering command of Davis Jr., the squadron was tasked with maintaining local air superiority and providing critical close air support for the beleaguered ground troops. The stakes were astronomically high. Failure here would not merely be a tactical setback, it would provide irrefutable evidence for those who argued against the efficacy of black combat pilots. Yet, within days, the narrative began to shift dramatically. On January 27 and 28, 1944, the pilots of the 99th engaged in a series of intense aerial combat engagements over the Anzio beachhead. Against veteran German pilots flying Focke-Wulf F-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s, the 99th achieved spectacular success. In just 2 days, they collectively shot down 12 enemy aircraft with no losses to their own formation. This decisive performance was not an isolated incident. Throughout the Anzio campaign, the 99th continued to excel in both air-to-air combat and providing pinpoint ground support, protecting Allied shipping and pounding enemy positions. This irrefutable demonstration of combat prowess finally began to erode the deeply entrenched skepticism. The previous biased reports were directly contradicted by verifiable combat statistics and the grateful testimony of ground forces. The 99th had not merely performed adequately, they had performed exceptionally under immense pressure and in a critical theater of operations. Anzio solidified their reputation, transforming them from a controversial experiment into a respected, indispensable fighter unit. It was the first resounding taste of victory, not just against the Axis, but against the insidious prejudice that sought to deny their very right to fight. Following their demonstrated efficacy in the skies over Sicily and Salerno, particularly during the intense Anzio landings, the strategic necessity to fully integrate these proven airmen became undeniable. This operational validation led to the formation of the 332nd Fighter Group in early 1944, a direct consequence of the combat readiness and exceptional performance of the previously isolated 99th Fighter Squadron. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., whose rigorous leadership had been instrumental in forging these pilots into an elite combat unit, was the unequivocal choice to command this expanded group. Comprising the original 99th, alongside the newly activated 100th, 301st, and 302nd Fighter Squadrons, the 332nd represented a significant escalation of African American participation in aerial warfare. To facilitate swift identification in the dynamic chaos of European air combat, the aircraft of the 332nd Fighter Group adopted a distinctive livery. Their empennages were painted a vivid, unmistakable red. This was not merely an aesthetic choice or a simple unit marking. It swiftly evolved into a potent tactical identifier for friendly forces and, crucially, a psychological symbol. For the bomber crews they were tasked to protect, the sight of those crimson tails became an immediate beacon of hope, a visual assurance of a disciplined and unwavering aerial escort. The 332nd maintained an unparalleled commitment to their primary directive, safeguarding the bombers at all costs. Unlike some other fighter groups, whose pilots occasionally broke formation to chase individual enemy fighters, the Red Tails adhered meticulously to their escort doctrine, earning them an unprecedented reputation for reliability and steadfastness among bomber crews. This disciplined operational methodology resonated deeply. Soon, Allied bomber crews were explicitly requesting the Red Tails for their missions, recognizing that their presence significantly increased the probability of mission success and, more vitally, survival. German Luftwaffe pilots, initially dismissive, soon learned to recognize and respect the distinctive red-tailed P-47 Thunderbolts and, later, the P-50 Mustangs. The moniker Schwarze Vogel, or more simply, Red Tails, became synonymous with exceptional skill, aggressive defense, and an unwavering combat tenacity. It was here, amidst the brutal aerial engagements over Axis-held Europe, that the legend of the Red Tails was truly forged. What had begun as a segregated experiment born of skepticism and racial prejudice transformed into an elite combat unit whose distinctive markings became an emblem of courage, proficiency, and an indomitable will to fight, earning respect across both friendly and enemy lines. The transformation of the Tuskegee Airmen into an elite combat unit was not merely a shift in perception. It was fundamentally driven by a calculated strategic doctrine, meticulously engineered and relentlessly enforced by Colonel Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. Recognizing the inherent vulnerabilities of the Allied bomber formations against aggressive Luftwaffe interception tactics, Davis, Jr. implemented a steadfast policy for the 332nd Fighter Group. The absolute priority was the protection of the bombers, above all else. In an era where many fighter escort groups, keen to rack up individual aerial victories and eager to engage enemy aircraft, would frequently break formation to pursue German fighters far from their assigned charges, Davis Jr.'s directive was uncompromising: stay with the bombers. This wasn't merely a suggestion, it was a non-negotiable strategic imperative. He understood that the attrition of the bomber fleet directly impacted the overall strategic bombing campaign, and that a bomber lost, regardless of how many enemy fighters were downed in pursuit, was a failure of the escort mission. The pilots of the Red Tails were explicitly instructed to maintain close escort, even if it meant foregoing opportunities for individual kills. Their primary objective was to repel enemy attacks directly targeting the bombers, ensuring their safe passage to and from their targets. This unique approach quickly distinguished the 332nd. Bomber crews, who had grown accustomed to their fighter escorts peeling off to engage in dogfights, leaving them exposed to devastating attacks, soon noticed a distinct pattern. The P-51 Mustangs and P-47 Thunderbolts, with their unmistakable red tails, remained, steadfastly adhering to their formations, warding off attackers with unwavering discipline. This consistent presence fostered an unprecedented level of trust and confidence among the bomber crews. They recognized that when the Red Tails were their escorts, their chances of mission success and, crucially, survival dramatically increased. It was this unwavering commitment to their protection, a doctrine rigorously instilled by Davis Jr., that earned them the enduring moniker Red Tail Angels, a testament to the unbreakable bond forged in the crucible of aerial combat. In the sweltering summer of 1944, as Operation Overlord raged in Normandy and the Eastern Front saw the Soviets' massive counteroffensive, the skies over Germany remained a brutal crucible. On July 18th, the 332nd Fighter Group plunged into one of the war's deepest and deadliest bomber escort missions, striking aircraft factories at Memmingen, deep in the Reich. The round-trip haul exceeded 1,000 miles, stretching their P-51 Mustangs to the brink and demanding ironclad formation discipline to shield the vulnerable B-17s and B-24s. As the Red Tails pierced enemy airspace, they met ferocious, coordinated assaults from Luftwaffe elites, Focke-Wulf FW-190s and Messerschmitt Bf-109s slashing at the bomber stream. Yet the 332nd stood unbreakable, their superior skill turning the tide. They dogged enemy fighters across the long haul, thwarting attacks and downing several German planes, cementing their legend as Europe's most trusted aerial guardians. Their pinnacle came late in the war, amid Germany's jet dawn. On March 24, 1945, Lieutenant Colonel Benjamin O. Davis Jr.'s formation escorted 15th Air Force B-17s to Berlin and collided with terror incarnate. 3 Messerschmitt Me-262s, the world's first operational jets, whose blistering speed rendered Allied prop fighters obsolete. But the Red Tails defied the impossible with cunning tactics and virtuoso piloting. Lieutenants Roscoe Brown, Earl Lane, and Charles Branning orchestrated a stunning ambush, leveraging the P-51's low-speed agility and pinpoint marksmanship to claim all 3 jets. It was no mere feat. It marked the first time U.S. piston-engine fighters downed German jets in air-to-air combat. Such heroics etched an indelible truth.
The 332nd, the famed Red Tails, forged an unmatched bomber protection record. While other escort groups suffered heavy bomber losses to fighters, the 332nd's charges endured far lower attrition rates than any in the 15th Air Force. Historical data confirms it, despite rare exceptions. Bomber crews dubbed them Red Tail Angels, clamoring for their escort, a resounding rebuke to the racist myths that birthed the unit. Their ledger didn't just shatter pre-war prejudices against black pilots, it redefined escort excellence, a blazing testament to unyielding valor. Yet, for some of these trailblazing aviators, the war presented an even more profound, almost surreal paradox. When a Tuskegee Airman was shot down over enemy territory and subsequently captured, his ordeal shifted dramatically from the high-stakes aerial ballet to the stark reality of a prisoner of war camp. These pilots, whose very presence in the U.S. Army Air Forces challenged deeply entrenched racial prejudice, now faced captivity under the Third Reich. What transpired within the confines of German Stalag Luft and O-Flag camps was an irony of almost unbearable weight. While the Nazi regime was founded on a horrific ideology of racial supremacy, their treatment of captured Allied airmen, generally adhering to the Geneva Conventions, often sidestepped the racial stratification so endemic to American society at the time. Black Tuskegee Airmen found themselves, in many instances, housed, fed, and accorded the same basic rights and facilities as their white American comrades back home. The contrast was undeniable. An environment where a black officer might share a bunk with a white officer, eat the same rations, and participate in similar activities, an institutional equality largely denied to them within their own military system back home. This wasn't born of German Enlightenment, but rather a disinterest in American racial dynamics, or perhaps a cynical adherence to international law for Allied combatants. For these brave men, fighting for a nation that segregated them, the unexpected, if chilling, equality found in a German prison camp served as a searing indictment of the racial injustices they had left behind. Even as the thunder of their Merlin engines faded from the skies over Europe, signaling the end of a triumphant campaign, the Tuskegee Airmen, led by Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., returned home to a stark reality. Their unparalleled combat record, forged in the crucible of war, had systematically dismantled every prejudiced assertion about their capabilities. Yet, the institutional segregation that permeated the United States Armed Forces remained stubbornly intact. The victory abroad did not automatically translate into equality at home. Davis Jr., now a proven combat commander, understood that the fight for full integration was a strategic imperative, not merely a moral plea. He continued his ascent through the ranks, his personal experiences and the irrefutable data from the 332nd Fighter Group serving as potent arguments against the prevailing discriminatory policies. His advocacy was relentless, leveraging the Tuskegee Airmen's exemplary performance, their unblemished record in bomber escort, and their destruction of 112 enemy aircraft as undeniable proof of competence. The post-war period saw increasing pressure on the U.S. government to address racial inequality, fueled by the moral inconsistency of fighting fascism overseas while maintaining a segregated military. This growing civil rights movement found a powerful ally in President Harry S. Truman. Faced with the practical challenges of a fragmented military and the ethical burden of segregation, Truman sought to modernize and unify the armed forces. On July 26, 1948, he issued Executive Order 9981, a landmark directive that declared, "It is hereby declared to be the policy of the President that there shall be equality of treatment and opportunity for all persons in the armed services without regard to race, color, religion, or national origin." The order further established the President's Committee on Equality of Treatment and Opportunity in the Armed Services to monitor its implementation. This executive order was a watershed moment, directly mandating the desegregation of the U.S. military. While its implementation faced considerable resistance and took several years to fully achieve, it was a direct consequence of the persistent efforts of leaders like Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. and the undeniable combat effectiveness demonstrated by the Tuskegee Airmen. Their legacy provided the definitive empirical evidence needed to overcome generations of ingrained prejudice, proving not just their valor, but the strategic folly of racial discrimination within the military's operational structure. The empirical evidence of the Tuskegee Airmen's combat prowess served as the foundation for a profound paradigm shift within the U.S. military's personnel policies. For Brigadier General Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., this wartime validation was the springboard for an exceptionally distinguished post-war career. His leadership was recognized not just on the battlefield, but in the strategic planning rooms of the Pentagon and various operational commands. He continued to ascend through the ranks, demonstrating exceptional administrative acumen and strategic vision. In 1954, he achieved the historic milestone of becoming the first African-American general officer in the United States Air Force, a promotion that shattered a deeply entrenched racial barrier. His career culminated in 1965 with his retirement as a lieutenant general, having commanded the 13th Air Force and served as Deputy Chief of Staff for Operations at Pacific Air Forces, among other critical assignments. Yet, despite Davis Jr.'s personal advancements and the unequivocal combat record, the broader national recognition for the Tuskegee Airmen as a collective entity was a considerably longer campaign. Their wartime achievements, though instrumental in the desegregation of the armed forces through President Truman's Executive Order 9981 in 1948, often remained relegated to the periphery of mainstream historical narratives for decades. It was a prolonged effort, fueled by the veterans themselves and their advocates, to ensure their sacrifices and triumphs were fully acknowledged by the nation they had so valiantly served.
This protracted quest for recognition culminated on March 29, 2007. In a ceremony within the United States Capitol Rotunda, the Tuskegee Airmen were collectively awarded the Congressional Gold Medal, the highest civilian honor bestowed by Congress. This prestigious accolade, presented to the surviving airmen and their descendants, served as a poignant national acknowledgement of their extraordinary service, courage, and perseverance in the face of systemic racial prejudice. President George W. Bush, addressing the veterans, stated, "Even the enemy could not deny their skill, and the bomber crews who depended on them knew the truth. The Red Tail Angels were the best." The medal was not merely a recognition of military valor, it was a profound symbolic gesture, affirming their critical role in the broader civil rights movement and in fundamentally reshaping the American military. Their journey from being dismissed as a social experiment to receiving the nation's highest civilian honor solidified their place in American history not just as exceptional pilots, but as pioneers who leveraged tactical excellence to effect profound strategic and societal change, ultimately transforming an initial climate of scorn into enduring national reverence. 13. Conclusion. 3 Wars Won: The Enduring Impact of Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. Ultimately, the indelible legacy of Benjamin O. Davis, Jr. and the legendary Tuskegee Airmen is defined not by a singular triumph, but by 3 simultaneous, profoundly consequential wars waged and won. First, they confronted and decisively defeated the Axis powers in the skies over North Africa and Europe. Their operational excellence, marked by an unparalleled record in bomber escort and numerous air-to-air victories, unequivocally shattered any pretense of racial inferiority in combat. Secondly, and perhaps even more arduous, they systematically dismantled the deeply entrenched racial prejudice within their own military apparatus. Through Benjamin O. Davis Jr.'s resolute leadership, meticulous training protocols, and the airmen's unwavering combat performance, they proved that competence, discipline, and valor transcended racial lines. Their achievements forced a reckoning within the command structure, irrevocably altering the institutional landscape of the U.S. Armed Forces. Finally, their successes reverberated far beyond the European theater, contributing a powerful, undeniable narrative to the burgeoning civil rights movement at home. Their battlefield heroics provided irrefutable evidence that African Americans were not only capable, but indispensable contributors to the nation's defense, challenging the very fabric of Jim Crow segregation. From an initial designation as a contentious experiment born of scorn and skepticism, Benjamin O. Davis Jr.'s visionary leadership transformed the Tuskegee Airmen into the revered Red Tails, an enduring legend of courage, unparalleled skill, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Their collective saga stands as a profound testament, leaving an indelible mark on both American society and military history, permanently altering the trajectory of racial equality and military integration. They fought 3 wars and they won them all.